Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Kay Volpe. Kay, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Vic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time. Kay, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I am a 23 almost year old male. I grew up in small town North Carolina. I've never lived anywhere outside of Wayne County, and I've only been to 3 other states, and only for short visits. I'm a digital artist. I just draw for fun. I do commissions occasionally for my friends and family. And Vic, I don't know what else to say.
That's okay. That's more than enough. No problem. Kay, you just mentioned Wayne County. All of your earliest encounters happened in Lucama, North Carolina. What was that area like when you had your earliest encounters?
Well, it was a very heavily wooded place, and there's a lot of farmland around. I just lived off of one paved road, and there was a dirt path next to my house, right at an intersection. I got made fun of occasionally because the name of the main road was my family's last name, so ha.
It's almost like you own the place.
My family did, apparently.
Yeah, sounds like it. Your most recent encounters happened in Seven Springs, North Carolina. How far is that from Lucama, and what can you tell us about it?
I'm not actually sure how far away it is. I think it's just across the county, but it is also heavily wooded with a lot of farmland around. We have a lot of graveyards around in both of these areas. And I've heard that there are a lot of encounters that happen around graveyards, so it's interesting.
You're right, they do seem to be a magnet. So let me get this straight, a bunch of graveyards around a heavily wooded area. That sounds like a perfect habitat for dogmen.
Apparently so, especially when there's also a lot of cow farmers around and sheep and whatnot.
Was there much in the way of moving water?
I live right by the Neuse River. It's less than a mile up the road from me, and there's a lot of swampland around here. Or, well, I don't know if I should really call it swampland, but it's swamp-ish. Back in Lucama, though, I'm not really sure.
Well, dogmen love swampy areas, so, what more could they ask for? Around the time when you had your first encounter, talk was going around about something unusual a hunter had killed in the area. Please expand on that for us.
Well, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, there had been a lot of screaming and, baby crying noises going around in the woods, and nobody quite knew what it was. Well, one day it stopped when a hunter turned up with, or what was said to have been, a 300-pound male mountain lion that he had shot to death. And it was just up the street from my house.
Wow, that was a Boone and Crockett mountain lion if I ever heard of one. That's huge.
Yeah, all of my searches say that male mountain lions typically only weigh up to 180 pounds, and that's on the bigger side.
Yeah, they don't get to be 300 pounds. I don't suppose that hunter ever mentioned, or maybe someone else ever mentioned to you what color that supposed mountain lion was.
No, I don't think I ever heard about that, but I recently heard about something called a wampus cat, and that caught my attention, and it was part of why I brought up the mountain lion when I was explaining things to you.
Yeah, if there are such things as wampus cats, then I guess I would definitely qualify as one. Don't know very much about them, so all I can do is just guess for the most part. You had a Pomeranian when you were a kid, Kay, that just might have had an encounter before you had your first one. What can you tell us about him and what happened to him?
Well, my Pomeranian's name was Taz, and we had him since before I was born, actually. And before we actually moved to Lucama, this poor dog was out in the yard with me. I was about 3 years old, and he got carried off by some sort of bird of prey. I think it was an eagle, and this thing tore out his stomach, and it was pretty much a miracle that he even made it through that. So this dog had been through some things, and he was my best friend. Well, we moved to Lucama when I was about 4 years old, and shortly after moving, we had noticed that he would not go to the bathroom if we were watching him. We would just let him out and close the door, and whenever he was done doing his business and marking his territory, he would come back and paw at the door to be let in. And then one day, he just kind of never came back. So for a few days, my parents just told me that he went out looking for our old house. So I was just a little kid. I think maybe I was 5.5 or so at the time. All of the timeline is really blurry. It's been a very long time. But he just never showed back up. So I went outside, and we had a field that I believe was growing wheat at the time. Our yard was overgrown. We had an apple tree in the backyard. And I remember standing in the tall grass under the apple tree and just calling for my dog, just Taz, Taz, over and over, and there was never any Pomeranian to be found. At the time, I really just believed that he had gone searching for our old place, but, later on, my parents told me that he must have just gone off and died. But I, looking back, don't quite believe that now.
Yeah, we're never going to know for sure what happened to him, but considering what we're going to talk about tonight, you definitely wonder if maybe a dogman was responsible for it. But nonetheless, it's horrible that you lost him like that he just disappeared. That had to be so hard to deal with.
It really was, Vic. My parents ended up getting me a new Pomeranian, and we called him Taz too. But he was an untrained puppy, and we ended up giving him to a family member who trains dogs, and they ended up keeping him, which I was okay with because he wasn't the same.
Well, it is. If you ever try to replace a pet, it never does work out. They're all different.
Absolutely.
That's right. All right, Kay, please tell us about your encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
All right, I'll do my best. So, I've sent you a screenshot of the area where I used to live, and it's at the intersection of Polly Watson Road and Spencer Road in Lucama, North Carolina. There's a little plot of green land right there by Spence Road, and that is where my house used to sit. It was just what we'd call a cracker box, just a small mobile home with a back deck that had a cover over it. And I had all kinds of cats that all stemmed from one cat that I befriended shortly after I moved there. Her name was Sagwa. So one day I'm out on my back deck, sitting on the steps, I believe, and we've got an apple tree in our backyard that I'm looking by, and I'm playing with the cats and my imaginary friends when I see these two figures that are running along the tree line to the south in that screenshot, and I look at them and I can't make out much detail except that they're running on all fours. They have a larger front than the back, so their shoulder was almost kind of at a hunch, and they kept their heads about even with their shoulders. And they each had this mane or fringe, like I call it, like a hyena that went from their neck down to about halfway down their back, and they had short or medium, maybe length, fluffy tails. And they're running towards Spencer Road along that tree line. And on the other side of the road, there's some trees, and then it's cow pastures for the Acock Brothers Farms. And I just watch these two figures run along the trees, and they cross the road, and I lose sight of them behind the houses that are in between my yard and where they are. So I run inside to my mama and papa, and I'm yelling, "Mama, Papa, there's werewolves outside. Come look, come look." and neither one of them believed me. My papa thought that I had probably just seen some bears or something, and my mom told me I must have just seen some badgers. I'm guessing she thought that I must have saw something closer to the house and mistook it for something else. Neither one of them would really pay attention when I was telling them that these things were down by the tree line, and it was far away, and I could see how big they were next to these trees that I had been by all the time. I don't remember if they actually came outside to look, now that I'm thinking about it. But I knew they definitely were not bears because of their coloration, and they definitely were not badgers because of their size. The farmers had recently had some cows that had gone missing over the course of a few months, I believe. And if I remember correctly, I was somewhere between 7 and 10 at the time. So it's been more than a decade, pretty well into long term, and I don't have that great a memory, so I apologize to anyone who's a little bit confused by my facts. So, once in a while, we were hearing these long, drawn-out, deep howls that were really eerie, and most of them were happening in the morning or evening rather than specifically during day or night. And occasionally they'd be heard at night, but I believe they were most active in the evening, and I couldn't quite figure out what these howls were. And my papa was always telling me there were no wolves around, they must just be coyotes. Well, I've looked up what coyotes sound like, and I promise you, these were not coyotes. So one day, I was riding my little Harley Davidson bicycle up and down Spencer Road like I did just about every day after school. Once I got to figuring out how to ride that bike, I was never off of it except when my parents were making me do my homework. So I loved going up that road, and I would go all the way up to where there were some houses to the other end of it, and at the time it was just a dirt path. It wasn't paved yet. And sometimes I would take my little sisters up in our red wagon, and I'd take them to the tree line and back to the house a few times a day. So one day I'm on my bike, and I'm on my way back home. It's evening, the sun is going down, it's starting to get really dark, and the breeze has picked up. And I'm coming up to the tree line, and I hear hound dogs of some kind. I'm not sure what kind of dogs they were really, but they were braying and being loud and aggressive, and I hear this deep, uncanny fighting noise, like a really big dog that's fighting, but bigger and deeper, and it was just, how do I describe it? So I'm hearing these hunting dogs braying, and they start screaming, and then there's this loud, almost guttural growling and howling noise, and it sounds like these big dogs are fighting, and it's absolutely blood-curdling, quite frankly. And then I hear, it had to be a couple dozen gunshots that were to my left in the tree line where I'm on the road. And it's really close to me, it sounds like. But you know, hunting dog noises, that carries, and such, that stuff, it just carries. So I can't say it was right next to me, but it was within a pretty close range. And I rode my bike back to my house, and I did not look back. And I didn't ever take my sisters that far up the road in the wagon again, and I don't think that I ever rode my bike up there except during real bright daylight hours after that. Looking back at my notes, I realize I've left out some details about the figures that I saw, but aside from the fact that they were thin-framed and had a canine face, I don't think I missed very much. I have no idea how long after it was that I saw the first two figures or whenever I heard the noises, because my timeline is really blurry. But one day I remember my family all piled into our blue truck. I think it was a Dodge or something. I remember I had named it Big Blue, and it was my favorite of our vehicles. And if I remember correctly, we were heading to Wilson. Now, up the road from me, there's a stop sign at an intersection, and there's a graveyard right before that stop sign and forest all around to the left. And I believe there was farmers' houses to the right. And I look out my window, and there is this huge, white, silver, gray-looking wolf standing in the ditch, and I lock eyes with it. Now, I'm going to do my best to describe. This thing was standing near the stop sign, and it come up at shoulder height to, I want to say, not too far below where the actual stop sign is, if you know how tall the actual signpost is. So at shoulder height, it's not too far from the bottom of the actual sign. And it's got this fringe on the back of its neck and down its back, like the ones I had seen before. And it had yellow or amber colored eyes, I want to say. It was almost sort of orangey, but that might have just been the lighting. And it's standing in this really tall grass. Like, this place was pretty unkempt at the time, and its rear half is kind of down in the ditch a little bit. So I can't see a whole lot of the parts of it that's touching the ground. It just looks like a huge wolf hyena type thing. And I'm not really seeing any distinct patterns on it, but there's almost like ticking of silver in the white, and then there's gray points. And I distinctly remember waving at this wolf as we're making our turn. And I say, "Bye-bye, Luna." And I had locked eyes with this thing and held this gaze with it as my dad is driving to the left. And then we're following a tree line, so this thing is out of sight before my parents start wondering what I was talking about. I guess they didn't know if I was talking about a cat or if this was one of my imaginary friends or something. I think this was around the time that my parents were shopping for a new house, so it was shortly after that we had moved away. And the day that we were moving, my parents told me that I could bring this one kitten that I absolutely adored. She was Sagwa's kitten, and I had named her Oreo. She was a little tuxedo cat. And she was about, I want to say a month or two. Nah, probably about 2 or 3 months old. She was weaned. But they had told me that I could bring this kitten with us, and every single day after school I had been playing with this kitten. And she was always right there. And I actually had given another kitten from that same litter to my aunt. His name is Smokey, and she's got him now, living his best life. But Oreo was nowhere to be found, and I couldn't find any of her litter mates, and I couldn't find Sagwa or any other cats. So I have spent hours looking for this kitten, and any cat at that point, and just no sign of any of them. Eventually I got over that, but I was really upset for a long time over not being able to bring that kitten with me. I had lost a lot of kittens over the years. I was really used to animals dying at that point. So it wasn't that big of an impact on me at around, I guess I was probably 11 or 12, something like that at this point. Fast forward to 2009, and I've moved to Seven Springs in North Carolina, which is where I'm currently staying, but I'll be out of here in a few months. There was a radio show, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it was called, but it was something to do with a swap shop. And there was a dog that was advertised. Her name was Jackie, and she was a rat terrier. And my dad decided it was time for me to go ahead and get a new pet because I was lonely without one, and I had never made many friends in school, and I was just a lonely kid. Even though I was really happy, just didn't have anybody to talk to. So he had my mom take me to go pick up this dog, and it turns out she's been really badly abused. She was part of a puppy mill. She had been abandoned in a closet when her prior owners left, and this old guy just happened to find her because he was cleaning the house to resell it. And he said that he wasn't able to keep her because she was getting really aggressive and he just couldn't deal with it. So I was really good with animals, and I had always wanted to be a veterinarian up until recent years when, depression really hit me. But at the time, I was really responsible, and I got this dog to calm down, and she let me pet her and play with her, but she would also still bite whenever I played too much. And I've got scars all over myself from this dog biting me, but I loved her to bits. Well, one day, one of our other neighbors had moved out, and before they left, they told us that we could have their Pomeranian. He was a black and brown Pomeranian, and his name was Bear. And at first, my parents didn't want him because we already had a dog, and that was enough, and we were afraid of how she would react to him. So they told us, well, if we didn't take him, they were just going to leave him there. And this dog had been severely neglected by them to the point where there were some mats on his body that were like rock, and we couldn't afford to take him to the vet, so he ended up being groomed by me, and I was always really careful with brushing my animals, but I had to use safety scissors to cut off those really bad mats, and it was so sad. This poor dog had been through so much. But anyway, every night I'd take Jackie out around 7 o'clock in the evenings, and then after her I would take Bear for a walk, and I'd just take them around my yard. I never went up and down the road or anything, but I'm not sure what time of year it was, but it had just gotten dark out. I remember the light in my backyard was flickering and the one in the neighbor's yard was on. So I go out my front door and I take a left down our front ramp with Bear on his harness and leash. And I was about to hang a left into the backyard, and I turn to go to the backyard and I stop. And I'm just frozen for just a second, and I'm looking at this pack of huge wolves in the neighbor's backyard, just chilling around the light pole. At this time, the neighbor had a chain link fence, just one of those small ones. It's like a dog kennel. And they had, I believe it was a pit bull at the time. I don't remember. But this dog was hiding in its doghouse. And it was silent. And there's a couple of darker colored wolves that are standing around, and some of them are just barely in view with the light. It's really dim. And then there's these ones are smaller. They're like almost the size of normal wolves. But then there's 4 or 5 much larger light colored ones that are almost white looking. And that was the first time I had felt fear towards these things. Because at the time, I'm out there with a small dog. And I yanked this poor thing's leash to pull him up into my arms and cradled him like a baby while I sprinted up the ramp, ran into the front door, and slammed it shut. The screen door still flying. I locked the deadbolt, dropped the dog, and grabbed my mom by her sleeve, and I'm telling her to look out the window, and she's taking too long. And I said, Mama, you need to look out this window right now. There are wolves outside. She looks out and tells me there's nothing there. And I swear I wanted to rip out all of my hair, Vic, because she did not believe me. So I'm telling her and my dad that there are these huge wolves in the neighbor's yard. And she and my dad are telling me there's no wolves here. And I said, explain what I just saw. I'm 12 or 13, maybe close to 14, just scraping that age. I'm not really sure. And mouthing off did not go over very well for me. But I ended up calling animal control the next day, and I told them that there had been wolves there. And they laughed me off and told me I probably just saw some coyotes or huskies. The neighbors had not been home. I told them that there were wolves out there harassing their dog, and they didn't believe me. And I just stopped talking about it after that. I was being bullied pretty bad in school, and I just couldn't deal with nobody believing anything I had to say. I was falling into depression, and I just started withdrawing from people at that point. So in the area that I live now, which is where this previous experience occurred, there is a circle where there's a field in front of my house in a semicircle, and then there's a semicircle behind my house that has a field. And we're just a row of mobile homes. And then all around this circle of fields, there's tree lines. And I'm not really sure how far these woods go. I've never looked at a satellite view, I don't think, of this area. But I've walked through the woods behind my house a few times. And I used to go out there all the time with my best friend. I don't know if I should use her name. I guess I'll just call her M. So, Em and I would go walking in the woods, and we liked to collect stones and cool-looking sticks and things, and we were plotting out how we were going to build a little bunker in the woods to bring, like, a tea set or something, and just have fun in the woods, you know? And this is after my dad passed, so I was about 15 and a half, going on 16. Maybe even 17 at this point. Yeah, I was 17, because this was just before my first girlfriend. So one day, Em and I are walking, and we're just kind of skirting around the tree line in the field. There's a tree line behind the house, and then there's a field and another tree line. So we're just skirting along the second tree line, and we hear this shriek, and it could have just been a screech owl, but it reminded me of those screams that I had heard when I was really, really little, back before the mountain lion incident. But this was in the middle of the day, and, I can't really confirm or deny whether it was an owl. But it scared us, and we ran for our dear lives. So I remember there was a time after that where it was snowing, or had just snowed and started snowing again. And she and I walked to the first tree line, and we were just gonna hang out, and we climbed on some logs and stuff and took pictures, and we were just having a time. And then we started walking back, and we're just having fun and looking at paw prints of various things in the snow. I think there were some fox prints and whatnot. And after the snow had cleared, we went back out. And the ground is still kind of wet from the snow melting and everything, because it had just finished. And we found deer tracks. So we were like, hey, let's follow the deer tracks. I don't know why, but we wanted to find the deer. So we follow these tracks, and then we start seeing these really large dog-like prints. So we're like looking at each other and wondering, okay, is somebody's dog roaming around? Because out here, there's no leash law or anything that I'm aware of. And we see big dogs roaming around all the time. But this was a really big print. I couldn't give you any measurements, but it was a good bit bigger than my hand is wide, I think. I have decent sized hands. So we stopped following the deer prints because we were wondering if, okay, maybe these wolves that I had told her about were still hanging around. And we didn't want to find out. Occasionally we would hear howling and such at night, but for some reason, being stupid like we were, we fell asleep on her trampoline one time outside, exposed, overnight, in the winter. That wasn't smart of us, but we woke up to a long, drawn-out, terrifying, low howl that night. And we moved from the trampoline into the tool shed in her backyard, and we locked it up and didn't go back out until it was daytime. Let's see. She moved out when I was about, I'm going to say 20. So since I didn't want to be walking into the woods, the main woods on my own, I decided to walk up to the woods. It's just a small tree line that's near the intersection to the left of the front of my house. I guess the west, I think. Yeah. And I felt safer going there because there are some houses that border one side of this tree line, and then on the other side it's just open field. So I could see out one way and I can see houses on the other, and there's people having a cookout, and I'm just exploring this small tree line. And I found this cat skull, just picked clean. It was almost immaculate. It was missing a couple of teeth. And it was just the top half of a cat skull just sitting on a path where Em and I had used to walk. And I didn't mention before, we had our own little path system that we would take to avoid all the thorn bushes and everything, so that we could get to the main woods easier without getting all cut up and caught on stuff. And I don't know why, but I felt compelled to take this cat skull. And so I picked it up and took it with me and took it home, and I think I boiled it, and I believe I still have it to this day, but I don't know where it is at the moment. But just sitting right there with no other remains around, there's no smell, there's no sign of any blood or nothing. It's just this cleaned cat skull just sat there.
Wow, that's creepy.
It very much was.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Actually, looking back at my notes, I realized that there is one thing that I missed while Em was still living here. We had taken one of our paths down into the main woods, and we decided that we were going to veer off into an area that we hadn't explored before. And we never went to the left. We always went to the right for some reason. Now, I'm not sure why that was, but I think for some reason the left felt creepy to us. But anyway, we go to the right a little farther than we ever had before, and we found this abandoned camper trailer. And I'm telling you, it was dead silence within, I want to say, about 100 yards of this camper trailer. And no sound. The windows and doors and everything, there's wood boards across them that are nailed into this trailer. And it's got no trespassing signs nailed into it everywhere. And there's no path or anything around. And it's just sat there. And it was pretty darn creepy. And we just kind of walked back the way we had came and went back to our normal area, and we didn't go back there.
I can't say I blame you.
And I also forgot to bring up the story about the creepy house and its barn. So when I was about somewhere between 8 and 11 years old, I want to say, there's a path in the screenshot that goes to the north from Polly Watson Road. And it's got a tree line on one side with this sort of geometric shaped field. And then there's another tree line in the middle and then more fields all around. Well, this path kind of curves, and then where that small tree line is, there's a house that has, it's got no trespassing signs and animal skulls nailed up and everything. And I specifically remember they had, it was a cow skull with really big horns on it that curled forward, and they had that posted on the tree out front. And underneath that cow skull and all above it and around it and everywhere was no trespassing signs. I think they gambled there. I don't know if they were doing other stuff, but they had signs that said trespassers will be shot, pinned on the door. There was, I think they were Confederate flags that were nailed to the front and to the side of the place. So I never touched the actual building. Because, needless to say, I was scared of it. But there was this broken down barn to the left of the front of that building, hidden away in the trees. You can't see it on the map or anything. But the second floor of it was like caved in, and then there were these torn up stairs that went up. And there was a safe level before the floor caved in. And one day, for some reason, I decided, hey, I'm gonna go up there. Maybe I thought there were kittens or something that might be hiding there. I don't know. I have no idea why I did the things I did. But I go up, and I'm just chilling on the second floor, and it's creaking, and I got nervous, so I just sat down, and there was an opening on the front of the barn, which was to my right on that level, and it was open all the way down to the floor, and I just kind of sat there and let my legs dangle over, and I heard this sniffing or like snuffing, chuffing sort of sound to my left, and it's this very, very small patch of trees, and then there's just a little tiny gap, just big enough for a small tractor to fit through, and then there's heavy woods that go on for a little while. I don't know how far back they go, but anyways, I heard this sound, and I kind of look, and then I just see a glimpse of that white and silver and gray looking fur, and this one's fur was like, I don't really know how to describe it. I don't want to say it was sleek, but it was really well groomed. There were no tangles or anything in it. It was longer fur and sort of smoothed back. And it was this huge thing, and I only saw the back end of it as it made its way towards the back of the barn. And then I heard this deep growling, and something came over me, and I leapt down from the second story of that barn, and I ran down that dirt path all the way back to Polly Watson Road and all the way back to my house. Never looked back once. I was terrified. And I ran into my front door and just slammed the door shut, locked it, ran to my mom. And that was all of that.
Can't say I blame you. That would have shaken anyone up.
So, my mistake confusing that the wolves that I saw at my neighbor's house were the first time I had felt fear for them. Actually, that was the first time. I had just blocked out that memory, I suppose. But dogmen are not the only cryptids, or what have you, that I believe that I've seen. There have been a number of other things, but there are two main ones. Well, yeah, I'll just stick to the two that I would like to bring up. I actually had mentioned to my friend, who I will just call D, about talking to you, Vic, and I mentioned that lately I've been feeling really anxious and I've been having flashbacks and these memories that I had blocked out. And D asked me what kind of things I was having flashbacks of. And, no, there are three things that I would bring up, not two. Getting my thoughts together. Alright, so, back at my old house, surrounded by fields, and they were always growing corn and grains and whatnot. They had tobacco and everything out there. And I remember when I was maybe 8 years old, and there was this small, maybe 8 to 10 inch tall, emaciated, white, humanoid looking creature that was sneaking through my admittedly disaster zone of a bedroom at the time and eating a mouse. I just got shivers. I don't know what it was. I only had the one flashback of it just eating the head off of a dead mouse. And like I said, I don't know if I ever saw it again. I mentioned to D that there was another thing that I had seen, that I had flashbacks of it looking through my window. And I am looking for that now, because at this point I'm just scrolling through me telling D about the Luna experience. Okay, so I told D that I had this one flashback to something that was looking into my window one night at that old house, and I simply could not describe it at all. There was no way that I could put it into words. And they responded and said, I had a thing like that. In my case, it was a literal living tumor with neon black eyes. And they said, I know that's not a thing, but that's the best way I can describe the way it looked. And I said, you know what? That just about sums up what I saw, except I wouldn't describe the eyes as neon black. I would say they were just hollow. So if you know what a tumor looks like when it's removed from someone's body, that's a really good descriptor for what this thing looked like. And it was just staring into my window one night. And then the final cryptid that I would like to bring up, unless I remember something else before you let me go. So there is a semicircle shaped field across the road from me with a ditch. And I just remembered another thing now that I've mentioned the ditch. More related to potentially being dogmen. Right across the road from my house, before I ever found the cat skull, but I'm not sure how long before, I went outside to check the mail one day, And I go to my mailbox and I smell this decaying rot. And I'm looking around wondering what in the world died. And I'm thinking maybe it's roadkill. So, me being me, decided, okay, I'm gonna find what this is because this is awful. I go across the road and there is a doe, pretty good sized white-tailed deer doe, laying dead in the ditch, and tucked under her hind legs is a fawn, and it is also dead. And it looks like I don't know the aging process of deer, but it still had its spots, but it was definitely not a newborn. And they're just laying dead in the ditch. I don't see any injuries on them. I mean, maybe a hunter went over his count or made a mistake or something, shot these deer and just dumped them there. But that seems like a really strange place to dump your illegally hunted deer, you know? Because there's no trees around there. They could have dumped them in the forest. And why would you dump them right in front of a residential area, you know? So I never touched these deer. They were disgusting. I'm not one for examining dead bodies. So, no injuries visible to me. There may have been injuries or bullet holes or whatever on the other side. I just couldn't see any, and I was not about to find out. So, they stayed there and they rotted away. Nobody ever picked them up or anything. And then, finally, the last cryptid that I want to talk about is I was about 12 or 13, and I had just gotten some brand new glasses. I had either just come home from the appointment where I was given the glasses, or it was a couple of days after. And there was corn growing in the field across the road. And I want to say it was about 6 feet tall. It may have been a little bit taller. I still don't know what time of year it was. I don't pay attention to crop cycles. I just do my own thing. And next to this tree line, there's a very slight hint at a path where the tractors turn in so they can do all the work and everything. And then there's these trees. It's about maybe 50 yards wide. I don't know, something like that, maybe a little more. And across the road is a little creek, it goes under the road and it goes through the woods, but there's a little bridge over this creek. And that's where there were originally some goats being raised, and this guy eventually got mini ponies and went up to horses and everything. But at the time, I think he still had the goats. And I have just gotten out of the car and I'm on my front porch. And I'm standing probably about 200 or less yards from this tree line. And I see this white figure between the corn and the trees. And it has this gently sloping downward back, and even at the distance I could see it was extremely emaciated. It looked like if the wind blew it wrong, it would just fall apart. I could see a good bit of its torso over the corn, but I couldn't see the bottom of the chest. It was positioned just so that I could see its tail, which was maybe a foot or two long, and it had, like, loose hairs hanging from it. I want to say kind of like a donkey's tail, almost. And then it had this long neck that was, I don't want to say it was giraffe-like, that's exaggerating, but it had a decently long neck, and a sort of deer-shaped face and dark eyes on this almost pure white, very slightly gray body. And I can't make out if it had ears, or I couldn't see the mouth or anything, but it had this very, very slight mane, not like a horse, but you know how a zebra's mane is, where it kind of stands up a little bit and then it's like coarse and it goes down the length of the neck and then it stops before the shoulders. And I'm looking at this thing, and my mom is standing next to me unlocking the front door, and I said, "Mama, do you see that?" And she turns around and looks at it, and she says, "Oh, that's just a white deer." Vic, I'm telling you, that was not a deer. This thing just kind of walked off. So that was my first encounter with it. I'm not sure how much later this was, but I had a second encounter with it, where I was riding my bike, I believe, either walking or riding my bike up and down the road. I no longer had my Harley Davidson bike, sad, but the goats were still there, I think, at this point. Pretty sure. So, I'm on my way back towards my house when I hear this sound that's almost like a wild boar. You know how they sound when they scream? And I look and I see this thing zigzagging through the trees away from me as it's screaming. And I pedaled my butt home so fast. And I don't remember personally seeing it again, but my younger sister, who I'll call Kai, came to me one day, and she had sketched a picture of a thing that she saw outside while she was walking our dog. And at this point, we no longer had Jackie or Bear. We had their puppy, Raven, who I still have now. She came to me with a piece of notebook paper with this sketch on it, and she said, "Is this the thing that you saw that one time?" And I had only told her about the first experience. And I look at this drawing, and it is exactly what I saw. Granted, neither one of us could draw very well at the time, but it is what I saw. So I told her, "Yeah, how did you know?" And she said, "I saw it standing across the road from the house, and I ran inside." So I guess it had spooked her, but she said that it was just standing there, and she didn't say what it was doing aside from that. So she has me come outside, and she shows me where it was, and she has me hold a stick up, and it was, I guess, more like a branch, not really a stick. And she has me hold up this branch thing to try and figure out how tall it was, and it ended up at the head, she claimed, from what she had seen. At the time, she was maybe 14, so she claimed it was about, I'm going to say 7 to 8 feet tall, if I remember correctly, compared to my probably about 6.5 foot reach with a little bit more from the branch. And then she had me go do the same thing standing next to the house, while she stood next to the house, and she said that was pretty accurate for what she had seen, but that didn't really add up to the size of the one that I had seen. And that's about all of the encounters that I can recall with any detail.
Wow, Kay, after having so many encounters with dogmen, how hard is it for you to have any normalcy in your life?
Well, personally, I'm more of an inside person. I don't go out a whole lot, but lately it has been really quiet around my house, and that gives me a lot of anxiety because I remember the camper, and I remember how quiet it was the day that I had the encounter near the barn, and it just is stressful for me. And sometimes I'll have darkness anxiety, and the darkness anxiety is actually why I contacted you, because with the quiet and how dark it feels to me, I've been having those memories of being spooked so much. And I mean, aside from that, it's not hard on me, but the anxiety issues just build up over time, you know?
Well, I can understand that, and I can appreciate that, but don't lose sight of the big picture. The fact is, on several occasions, if these dogmen that you encountered wanted to hurt you, they could have, but they didn't. And they didn't because they didn't want to. It's all too easy to lose sight of the big picture and think, okay, they look so terrifying, they must be monstrosities that are going to rip you apart as soon as look at you. But yeah, the facts of your encounters just don't bear that out. Now, I'm not saying that dogmen never do hurt people. I'm not saying that at all, because they do from time to time. Not very often, but from time to time they do. But look at your encounters accurately. Take them as they actually were, and don't let human nature cause you to turn them into something that they weren't. And I think a lot of your problems are going to go away in time. It's going to take practice. It's going to take time, you working on thinking about them accurately, but you can do it.
Well, thank you, Vic. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. You are welcome. Well, we're about out of time, so at this point, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing all those experiences with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you getting in touch with me.
Oh, you know you're welcome. If I can ever help in the future, yeah, please do let me know. But having said that, thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.